Thank you very much, Excellencies, Nobel laureates, ladies and gentlemen. I should first start by saying it's a real honor for me to be here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. This is a wonderful topic for us to discuss, and it's critically important that we are able to discuss this with seriousness and with integrity and with a clear eye of how important it is to improve these critical human rights that we are all adamant in defending. Promoting human rights and gender equality is a key priority in Norwegian foreign policy and in our development policy. Gender equality is not only essential for the realization of human rights, it is also a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, democratic, and sustainable world community. We must recognize the pivotal role played by women human rights defenders in building inclusive and democratic societies and contributing to the realization of the 2030 development and sustainable goals. Women human rights defenders, like Narges Mohammadi, play a key role in raising awareness, empowering the people, and holding governments accountable. Through their work, they show the relevance and mobilizing power of universal human rights. Unfortunately, often at great cost for the women themselves who are involved in this process. Women human rights defenders often become the targets of threats and harassment, and even imprisonment, both because they are human rights defenders and because they are women. Women defending sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as those defending equal rights for LGBTIQ persons, are at particular risk of harassment and threats. Their bravery is immense and a source of inspiration for all of us. It is critical to strengthen the capacity of women's organizations to put women's rights and gender equality on the agenda in relevant processes, including in multilateral fora, to ensure that women's rights and gender equality are respected and secured. Developing and strengthening the normative framework is a central part of our effort in supporting human rights defenders. It's critical, we think, to also acknowledge that this is not just about values, this is about international law. These principles that we are defending, gender equality, is not just something that governments can decide that they will adhere to at their own choosing. These principles, these core rights for women are reflected in various human rights instruments, which means that governments have an international legal obligation to adhere to these rights. And it's important for us when we liaise with other governments, when we talk to other civil society organizations, to really make that point clear. Again, this is not something that governments at their own discretion can choose whether to implement or not. This is actually hardcore international law that states have a responsibility to implement. And through Norway-led negotiations, the UN has also adopted resolutions, non-binding resolutions, recognizing the positive, important, and legitimate role of human rights defenders and women human rights defenders, and condemning violence, intimidation, and reprisals against them. Norway is extremely concerned about the human rights situation in Iran, especially the situation for women. We commend the courage of human rights defenders in Iran. They continue to suffer intimidation, prosecution, and ill treatment. We are raising human rights concerns with Iran directly and in the UN. I have personally met with my Iranian counterparts in various contexts and raised the issue of prosecution of human rights defenders and the use of the death penalty with Iranian officials, and we will continue to do so. Last week, Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre addressed the situation for human rights defenders in a phone call with the President of Iran. So this is something that is not only issues that we talk about in speeches before civil society and friends and like-minded. This is something that we take very seriously and that we also use as a point when we engage other governments and also governments that we think are not upholding the standards that they are legally committed or have an obligation to uphold. In line with our UPR recommendations to Iran in 2019, the Norwegian government continues to urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to live up to its international human rights obligations. We have recommended to Iran, 1, to create a safe and enabling environment for civil society and human rights defenders, especially women human rights defenders, and 2, to ensure the rights of detainees and prisoners and their right to receive satisfactory medical treatment. The work of Narges Mohammadi inspires us all to do more and to do better in our fight for global gender equality. Unfortunately, Iran is not the only country in which human rights obligations are violated and where gender equality is not respected. The situation in Afghanistan will be addressed later today. The decree recently issued by the de facto authorities, the Taliban, the so-called law on propagation of virtue and prevention of vice, even imposes that the voices of women must not be heard in public. Women in Afghanistan are indeed targeted for their gender. I've also met with representatives of Taliban, and I've raised the exact same concerns. Taliban now being de facto authorities, in other words, ruling in Afghanistan, they also have legal obligations. And these are obligations that are binding on Afghanistan, binding on whoever is in charge of the government in Afghanistan. And we must and we will continue to hold them accountable. In our efforts to counter the attack on women's rights, we are guided by our action plan for women's rights and gender equality in Norwegian foreign and development policy. The plan was launched last year and will last until 2030. And as you can see, I've already alluded to the fact that we have channels of communication, not just with Iran, but also with the Taliban and other actors. And this is, I think, a through line in our foreign policy. We're extremely clear-eyed about the values that we defend, but we will not let those values come in the way of engagement. So we are adamant that in order to progress these extremely important issues, we have to engage various authorities, we have to engage civil society, we have to engage those who are not like-minded with us in this endeavor. Otherwise, we will not be able to progress our common agenda, which is to progress the issue of gender equality. Next year, we mark 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Program of Action. We are still working hard to uphold the principles agreed upon in 1995. Many deserve our sincerest thanks for the progress that we have achieved, but we still have work to do. The pandemic and other crises have set us back in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially goal number 5 on gender equality and women's empowerment. But we will not let up. We have to be adamant in terms of progressing this terribly important agenda. And we will, as the Norwegian government, we will continue to stand behind all of those who are at the front line of defending these integral values that we are all committed to, both in terms of our values, but also in terms of applicable international law. And with that, thank you very much.